First Edition is a ministry of First Community Church, a place of worship for everyone, regardless of religious background. Join us to enhance your spiritual journey and share in God's love and grace. And now, First Edition.
Good morning. Welcome to First Edition, the television ministry of First Community Church. My name is Glenn Miles. I'm the senior minister here in this congregation, and we're thrilled that you have joined us on this day for worship. It's kind of a fun day. There are a couple of things happening. The first one is, it's the blessing of the backpacks. It's a moment in worship when we ask all of our children, youth, and even adults who are involved in school to come forward with their backpack and to come forward with whatever they carry for school and join us at the front as we bless them and ask God's Spirit to be present with them during this educational year. Secondly, I'm continuing my sermon series titled Bridge Over Troubled Water, inspired by the music of Simon & Garfunkel. This Sunday's sermon is Sound of Silence. I think one of the most beautiful lines, most haunting lines to open any song in rock and roll history is that line from The Sound of Silence. Hello, darkness, my old friend. We'll listen to that song. We'll also listen to Micah as he reminds us what matters most in this life. Thank you for joining us. I trust that the Spirit will be present with you.
Hello. Hey, if you are a kid who just started school, can you come forward? I promise I won't embarrass you. You can just come and sit down here. I've got something to give you. Just come on up and sit. This will be very relaxed, I promise. Here, I'll sit on how about if I sit right here and you can come sit with me? Wow, it's nice to see so many of you. Did you guys bring your backpacks? You don't have to have your backpacks. I just want to see your faces. So, have you guys, you can do a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or a thumbs in the middle. So this question is just a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Have you started school? Yes, thumbs up. Or have you not yet started school? Thumbs down. Is that everybody? Everybody has started school? I wonder if there are any of you who have just started kindergarten for the very first time. Can you show me that? You have. Anybody else? Wow, starting kindergarten is pretty exciting, I think. I wonder if there's anybody else who has switched schools. I wonder if you started school at a different school. Did you start at a different school? Yeah, that can be hard, but it also can be kind of exciting, right? Is there anybody who they ended up having the same teacher as they had last year? That sometimes happens. Anybody? No. Okay. Well, here's the thing. When we start new things, we can have all kinds of different emotions. So maybe you guys can tell me with your thumbs up and thumbs down how you feel about this. Were some of you kind of scared? I know when I start new things, sometimes I'm kind of scared. Were some of you kind of excited? Maybe in between? Were some of you nervous? Yeah, it's hard to know, like maybe you don't know who your teacher is, right? Or you don't know if your friends are in your class. That can be really difficult. I wonder if you ever have sometimes all those emotions at the same time. Yeah, I have felt those things. So grown-ups, I'm gonna ask you to help me, because I've asked you guys to help me before with other things. Grown-ups, raise your hand if you've ever started something new and you were kind of nervous. Look at all of them. They have all been kind of nervous at some point. Raise your hand if you've ever been kind of excited to start something new. Yeah. Raise your hand if you've ever had lots of different emotions at the same time when you started something new. Yeah, so sometimes that's just how it is. And so we can have all kinds of different emotions about those situations. And the really cool thing is that no matter how we're feeling or what is happening, God is always there with us. So I hope you'll remember that. Sometimes things get hard and you might feel alone, but just know that you are not alone. So now we have a really cool thing to give you. Also, if there are any grown-ups who also started school, I'd love for you to come forward now because we have something to give you to put on your backpack or your bag or whatever. So come on up if you'd like to come. All right, kiddos.
We want to offer a prayer blessing on these children and all who are involved in school this school year. Let us pray. God of fresh starts and new beginnings, we bring ourselves, our big feelings, and our backpacks to you. In our backpacks, we carry blank pages, sharpened pencils, pointy crayons, and in our hearts, we carry big feelings, unanswered questions, and hopeful expectations. There are endless possibilities of what this new year might bring, of what we might learn, who we might meet, and who we might become. God, our friend who is always with us, be with us through it all. Be with us as we ride the bus. Be with us as we walk. Be with us as we buckle seatbelts, zip up jackets, and tie shoes. However we get there and whatever we wear, bless this journey into something new. For the grown-ups going back to school with us, God, be with them too. Thank you for our teachers, helpers, caregivers, and leaders, and for all they do to help us learn and grow. God, our friend, who's full of wonder, fill their hearts and bless their hands. Amen.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk to you again. Because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping. And the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a street lamp. I turned my collar to the cold and damp, when my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light that split the night and touched the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that the voices never share, and no one dare disturb the sound of silence. Fool, said I, you do not know. Silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my arms that I might reach you. But my words like silent raindrops fell and echoed in the wells of silence. And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made. And the sign flashed out its warning in the words that it was forming. And the sign said the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls, and whispered in the sounds of silence.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I think it's one of the greatest opening lines in rock and roll history. Immediately sets the tone for what we're about to hear. There's a sense right there in those opening words of sadness, sorrow, melancholy, maybe even a suggestion of anger and rage coming later. That's suggested especially in that line that names the fact that the people bowed and prayed to the neon gods they made. That's not a positive line. The group Disturbed recently covered this song by Paul Simon, The Sound of Silence, back in 2016, I think it was. They're kind of a punk band, and they took a little different approach to it, although they open in that similar sort of folk rock music style, sounding very much like Paul Simon, until you get to the middle of the song or so, and all of a sudden David Draymond, who is the lead singer in the band Disturbed, changes his tone and he gets angry and he gets a little more frustrated, and you can just feel a rage sort of bubbling out of him as he sings those songs, sings those lines, and the people bowed and prayed to the neon gods they made. In fact, he got a thank you note from Paul Simon saying your version was beautifully done, thank you, sort of implying that he gets it. It has that beautiful folk rock sense, but there's that melancholy sense that runs through it. Sorrow, sadness, even some anger and rage, alienation at the way the world just seems to not care about anyone else but itself, as though the people care about no one else but themselves. In fact, some of the lines almost carry a prophetic kind of biblical sound to them. Hearing without people hearing without listening. Doesn't that sound like today? I mean, this is written in the 1960s, and there's some different theories about why Paul Simon wrote it. One of the theories is that he wrote it in response to the alienation and the sadness that the whole world felt when John F. Kennedy was murdered. Another theory is that Art Garfunkel had a friend in college who was slowly going blind, who Garfunkel helped learn how to navigate his way around through bus stations and other kinds of things. And his friend nicknamed Art Garfunkel Darkness because he was there so often with him in his own blindness. That might be one of the reasons. Some others say that it was Paul Simon as a child who liked to go in his bathroom, turn off the light, and sing there because he loved the acoustics of a bathroom. It was also sort of his refuge. All of those may be answers, perhaps, but there's definitely a biblical prophetic sound to many of the lyrics. People hearing without listening. Do you watch any of the news shows, especially when they bring on different voices from different perspectives and different sides of the same issue? And have you noticed that oftentimes as they get into the discussion, it's not really a debate. It sees who can talk the fastest and the loudest, and they just shout over the top of each other, and it's not hard to hear Paul Simon in the background sighing and singing, people hearing without listening. Sometimes I get so disgusted and so disturbed myself listening to that kind of non-argument where they're just getting louder and louder. I'll turn it to a sports station. And sure enough, I'll go to one of those and there'll be two voices arguing over who's number one in college football. And so I give up on that. I go to the Disney Channel and watch Star Wars and just try to forget all the yelling and screaming going on in the world, just to get away from it all. People hearing without listening. Is that true in your home? Is it true at work or at school? I had a conversation with a woman about 3 weeks ago on this similar topic, and she said to me, people listen to reply. People listen to formulate their argument. People listen to own the other person. Have you heard that phrase before? Boy, she really owned him when she made that point. Boy, he really owned her when he made that point. It's as though we are just continually a parody of our own selves. What was true in the 1960s is true in the 2020s. And frankly, it was true 700 years before the time of Jesus. If you go back to that day when the prophet Micah was preaching to the people in Israel, he would have stood and applauded today, I'm sure, at the end of this song. He would have appreciated it deeply, not only for the beauty of their voices, but also for the power of their words. People hearing without listening, that's his audience. Micah, for 5 chapters, rails against the people of Israel and their greed, their desire to get more and more and more, to line their own pockets, to get as much stuff as they can. And if they have to step on the back of the disenfranchised, of the poorest of the poor, of the weak, of people who've been turned into slavery, then God knows they'll do it, because all they care about are themselves. And Micah wants them to see this is not who we are. This is not who God has called us to be. We were called out of slavery to welcome the widow, to welcome the orphan, to welcome the disenfranchised, to welcome the stranger, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what border they've crossed, to welcome them. And he's frustrated and angry in his, you can go back and read the first 5 chapters. Then we get to chapter 6, and his voice gets even stronger, and then finally the people reply. Ted did a nice job reading this morning. But the reply of the people sounds a little too churchy, a little too precious, a little too perfect almost. Because what they're really saying is they just don't care. The way I hear them responding to Micah is in the voice of Thurston Howell III. Remember the TV show Gilligan's Island? And Thurston Howell III, who was the guy who always was saying to Gilligan and the skipper, Lovey and I would like to have you over for dinner. They kind of had that voice. That's the voice I hear the Hebrew people having. Micah preaches all these things, and then they say, well, then what does God want? Does God want more calves? We have some year-old calves we'll give God. Does God want thousands of rams? How about 10,000 rivers of oil? Maybe even my firstborn child. They're ridiculous answers. They're exaggerated responses. There's not even a single river of oil in the world, let alone 10,000 rivers. They're basically saying to God, we don't care. They're trying to own God. They're trying to give a reply that shuts God up, that pushes God off to the side, and no longer is a bother for them, because they're still going to do whatever it takes to line their own pockets, to get what they want, to make sure they've got as much as they can get first. And then maybe, if there's time, they'll worry about the others. Micah responds in a clear and simple voice. What does God require? Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly. Notice this. Love and justice are connected. A better translation of the idea of kindness is to understand it as loving kindness. Do justice. Love kindness. Let love guide you toward kindness, and then walk humbly. It's the great preacher Otis Moss out of Chicago who says that love without justice can just become almost weak-minded sentimentalism. Justice, on the other hand, without love, devolves into an eye for an eye kind of revenge attitude. Love and justice call on each other to correct whatever needs correcting in your life, your home, your community, our world. In fact, Pastor Otis gives a great story about himself that illustrates the point he's trying to make. In his family, they love to play I scare you kind of games. You know what I'm talking about? Where what would happen is his son Elijah, he has 2 kids, his son Elijah would hide behind a door, and when Otis comes walking in the room, Elijah would jump out at him and scare his dad, make his dad jump or cry out. And so they're always constantly trying to get the other, to scare the other, to make them jump or scream or whatever it might be. And in this particular story, he says there was one time when he was trying to talk to his son, who was watching TV. He was in the family room, had the TV on in front of him, and he kept saying some things to him, asked him a couple of questions, and it became clear his son couldn't hear. He wasn't just ignoring his dad, he just really couldn't hear him at all, because he noticed that there were headphones in his ears. So finally he thought, oh, this is a chance to get him. He sneaks up behind him, the son doesn't see him still, reaches around the chair where he's sitting, pokes him in the side, says, gotcha, and he jumps about 30 feet in the air and screams really loud. It was a fun moment in their family. The next day, Otis is preaching or speaking to a group of ministers, a cohort that have gathered under the auspices of the Auburn Seminary in New York City. And he's there to share with them some of his ideas for being a pastor. With this group of pastors, though, he starts by telling the story of what happened the day before with his son Elijah. It's just kind of a cute way to open his talk. And he says, when he gets to the punchline, basically, he says, and then Elijah screamed like a girl. And as soon as he said those words, he looked down to his left where there were two of his preacher friends, both who happened to be women. And he realized he was in trouble. They sort of looked at each other and laughed a little bit and smiled. And then one of them asked rhetorically, "So, is it bad to be a girl? Is that what you're saying?" The other one asked another question and said, "You don't want your boy to ever sound like a girl. Is that what you're saying, Pastor Otis?" And do you know what he said in reply? It was the sound of silence. He was quiet. That was supposed to be a joke. Thank you, Mary Kate. Mary Kate is here to laugh, to provide laugh lines for you all when we get to those points. He didn't say anything at all. He responded with nothing. And then one of them said, "Otis, we love you. And we want to correct you gently because we know what you really think, that you don't think that at all." And Otis says in his book, Dancing in the Darkness, that's what love and justice does. Love and justice together are willing to correct us. It also identified his inherent bias. Maybe he would never, ever preach intentionally that somehow boys should never sound like girls and vice versa or whatever, but there was this inherent bias that screaming out in fear is something a little girl would do. Love and justice work together to correct whatever needs to happen in our world. Mike is clear. Mike is clear. It's not about all the rams and all the 1,000 rivers of oil or anything else that you might bring. What God wants is you doing justice, loving kindness, walking humbly. As Pastor Otis would say, in that moment of love and justice, he was humbled in an appropriate way. Jesus makes the same kind of point in Matthew 25. Do you know Matthew 25? It's called the parable of the sheep and goats. It's a well-known, very famous story. What Jesus says, and I think you'll recognize it as I get into it, Jesus says, anytime you care for the marginalized, you feed the hungry, you clothe the naked, you visit the sick and the imprisoned, anytime you do something like that, you are doing it as though it was more for me, or even more intentionally for God. Anytime you care for someone who's been pushed aside by society, who's lost some freedoms, who's been left behind, who's been forgotten, anytime you help that one make their way to stand up fully and completely under the love of God, it's as though you're doing it to God's very self. And then Jesus basically concludes that parable by saying, and if you're not doing that, well then the hell with you. That can be shocking, can't it? That's how strong Jesus is when he shares that parable. Otis Moss wants to understand something similar. Let's put his words up on the screen. Self-proclaimed patriots often tell protesters, this is America, love it or leave it. But it is the spiritual obligation of those who've been marginalized in the space called America to stay, to work, to fight, to criticize, and when necessary, to protest. Inherent in the idea of love is struggle. Inherent in the idea of love is struggle. We are under obligation as well. We are under the obligation to reach out to our friends who have experienced less freedom than us, to reach out to our friends who have run up against racial bias throughout their entire lives. It is our obligation in the name of love, in the name of justice, to reach out as much as we can to those who have been marginalized, pushed aside, left behind. What was it Paul Simon sang? The people bowed and prayed to the neon gods they made. It's a challenging word. It's a word that comes to us over the airwaves, as it were. It comes to us calling on us to step out of that comfortable place, to recognize and see that the world needs us. The world needs you and me. I've had a few sleepless nights this week. I can tell I'm off sabbatical. All of a sudden, I can't sleep anymore, just thinking about things all the time, and it wakes me up in the middle of the night. Usually when that happens, I diagram new basketball plays. It's a really silly thing. You should pray for Julie that I'm actually doing that in the middle of the night. It's very, very strange. I think of Bobby Knight's motion offense, and I come up with some new options that he might want to try, he might want to run. That's what I usually do. This week, though, I've had the sound of silence in my head every night. I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. In fact, this happened on Thursday morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, wide awake, can't sleep. That song's in my head, and I begin to wonder, I wonder if this is a nudge of the Spirit saying to me that this is a word the church you serve needs. And almost as soon as that thought appeared, it's like the Spirit said to me, the one who needs it is you, Glenn. The one who needs it is you. The one who thinks too often that I'll just give 10,000 rivers of oil. Is that what you want? The one who needs it is you. The one who needs it is us. The words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls and whispered, the sound of silence. Perhaps Micah, maybe even the very Spirit of God, is whispering to us on this day to give ourselves over in the name of justice, in the name of love, and to humbly walk in that way.
Everything you do, God is doing with you, and everywhere you go, God is there. Nothing can divide us, always right beside us, everywhere, everywhere. God is there. God is there. God is there. God is there. Everything you do, God is doing.